Tax regime is a mechanism of tax regulations and rates that comprises the taxation approach of a government. Efficient tax regime is a term reportedly used by Sergei Magnitsky and William Browder while the two worked in Russia. It is yet unclear what meaning they put into the term. William Browder once proclaimed himself the greatest investor in Russia. However, the figures of Hermitage Fund, founded by Browder, were not that great and had nothing to do with talent of Mr. Browder. According to the official report of Hermitage Fund, the main reason for good performance of the fund was Russia's state policy, as at the time the economy of Russia was significantly growing. In 1996, Mr. Browder received an offer to make some easy money in Russia. Realizing that during the time of President Boris Yeltsin, the shadow economy of the country was emerging and the profit might be large, Mr. Browder also realized that American citizenship would drag him down in his gold rush. Not willing to pay taxes both in Russia and the US, in 1998 Mr. Browder gave up his American citizenship, just as the law about reporting foreign income came into effect. When asked why he gave up his citizenship, Mr. Browder responded.
So then why'd you give up your US citizenship?
Personal reasons.
And what are those personal reasons?
My family was persecuted during the McCarthy era.
Now, it must be pointed out that Mr. Browder had business in Russia for 10 years, yet had no working visa. When the Russian government found that he was working on tourist visa for so long, it blacklisted him and denied entry to the country in 2005. By that time, there had already been opened 4 investigations into Browder in Russia. Later, Mr. Browder was tried in absentia for tax evasion and sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. The court found that he masterminded and implemented a fraud scheme to evade taxes. Yet Mr. Browder claims that Russian government had no basis for investigating him.
Is it your view that Russia had absolutely no basis for investigating Hermitage at that time?
Objection to the form.
Yep, my view.
And no basis for investigating you?
Yep.
And no basis for investigating Mr. Magnitsky?
Yes.
In 1998, Hermitage Fund set up 2 companies called Saturn and Dальняя Steppe in Kalmykia, a region of Russian Federation. Both companies were funded by the Hermitage and did investments, yet the funds for their business came indirectly through Cyprus-based companies owned by Hermitage. The reason for choosing the region of Kalmykia was the following.
There were 2 tax incentives in Kalmykia, or there were 2 tax incentives that we relied on, or the Hermitage Fund relied on. The first was the Kalmykian tax regime, which allowed the companies to pay lesser tax than in other regions, and the handicapped tax benefit, which allowed a reduction in the federal tax rate. The handicapped tax regime required that more than 50% of the employees qualify under certain rules of definition of handicapped individuals.
It can make you think that Mr. Browder was not just an investor, but a great, generous and wise man looking past the stigmas involved. Browder did well. He hired disabled people, provided them with a job, and at the same time helped his companies in the long run. Unfortunately, that was not how it worked.
You listed those people as expert analyst division, working in the expert analyst division. Do you remember that?
No.
You see that on the second page. It says that in the middle that it names 3 employees were engaged for the position of expert analyst division. You see that?
Yes, I see that.
You didn't use them as expert analysts, did you?
I wasn't managing the employees.
You have no idea who was, you were the general director and you have no idea who was managing these employees?
That's correct.
And it wasn't Mr. Magnitsky?
It wasn't Mr. Magnitsky.
I see. And it said that if you go further down, that these 3 employees were disabled. They were working at other locations as physical laborers. You see that? Bakayev has no education or qualifications. Bayakov is a worker. Batkiev is a machine engineer. Had nothing to do with Saturn and were only used by the claimant to get the income tax relief. Do you see that?
Yep.
And that's what the court found, right?
Yep.
In fact, Mr. Browder set up companies in Kalmykia for its tax regime. He hired people with disabilities who did not perform any work, but that allowed his companies to pay lesser tax. Moreover, Mr. Browder tried to avoid paying additional taxes even when it was ruled by a Russian court. When the court found that Saturn used the disabled workers to get tax incentives, it decided that there were additional taxes due. The company had to pay the fine of 900,000 rubles, there were arrears of 4.6 million rubles, and a penalty interest of 252,000 rubles. The court wiped out the fine, but obliged the company to pay the arrears and penalty interest.
Did you pay this? Saturn pay this?
Not that I'm aware of.
The exactly same scenario may be tracked with another company, Dalnaya Step. Mr. Browder was the general director of the company for a few years and was personally responsible for filing the tax returns. The arbitration court of Kalmykia found that Dalnaya Step did not pay 551 million rubles in taxes. When asked about the unpaid tax at the deposition in 2015, Browder said he had not known about it.
Is this the first time that you've learned that the Kalmykian Arbitration Court found unpaid taxes for Dalnaya Step of 551 million rubles?
Yes.
That's almost, what, $20 million?
I don't have my calculator. Sounds...
Take my word for it. I checked the exchange rate and used my calculator. It's 19 million and something.
Both companies were later put into bankruptcy, but at the time they did not belong to the Hermitage Fund anymore. In 2004, Saturn and Dalnaya Step were transferred to a risk management company to be liquidated, apparently without paying taxes. Going back to efficient tax regime, it may be concluded that in order to make a tax regime efficient, Mr. Browder followed these steps. He set up a company in the region with tax incentives, hired people with disabilities who did not actually perform any work for the lack of experience and education. When obliged by the court to pay taxes, Browder placed the companies into bankruptcy. Clearly, the Russian government had solid reasons for investigating Mr. Browder, who managed to get away with tax evasion, damaging the economy of Russia. The world community witnessed a very significant rise of business fraud in the 1990s, which was quite difficult to fight against. Yet, a question how one can enjoy such impunity because of sole inability of the community to take legal action remains unanswered.